Hello and welcome everyone. It's Suzanne here from the Project Manager Clinic, and today I've got Margaret DeSantos with me again to talk about RACI, and we're really excited about this. And I sort of feel like it's a game show almost when I can say, let's talk RACI.
Yes, love it.
So, because it's exciting, and I don't think most people are excited about it. But Margaret, you're a super experienced program and project manager, and you've worked in the banking and finance industry, and property, and also not for profit. So, and I knew, and people who are watching the channel regularly will recognise you as having participated in these quite a number of times already, and I really appreciate all of that. But you do not work at the PM clinic, so I just wanted to flag that and let people know that you are out there and your details are at the end of the slide deck, just so that people know. Okay, so we're going to get going on Let's Talk Racy in a second, but don't forget to subscribe down below and give us a thumbs up if you're happy with the content, because we love bringing these things to you. Now, let's see if I can get this to work. Okay, it's jumped forward. So, Margaret, can I hand over to you and I'll just go through some slides and ask you some questions?
Absolutely. Can't wait. And I
Great.
absolutely love this topic.
Me
So
too.
let's get cracking.
So, and
So,
you mostly put this together, so also thanks for that.
yes, that's okay. So, when Suzanne asked me about speaking about RACI, I was super excited because it's often an overlooked artifact that is so valuable to the project team, stakeholders, and anyone else that is interested in any project or program. And the reason why is because it's almost like an overview of who's who, what are they do, what do they do, what for, when, where. And so I thought it'd be really great to introduce the 5 Ws and practical examples of when we would use these RACIs in projects and programs. So a well-crafted RACI matrix can actually prevent misunderstandings. And often when I've had a RACI or people haven't actually looked at the RACI and they go off and do their own thing, it's often because they don't understand what their role is, what they're supposed to be doing, the fact that they've understood things from other projects or programs that they think they can bring into other projects and programs, and yet it may not be the right thing to do, especially when people have been appointed into certain roles and their role and basically communication in the project is basically set up by a RACI. So it does bring structure and dynamics and accountability, and it makes it very clear to people that are looking in, that are on the sidelines of projects, that are, able to, I guess, sit at the steering committee, sit at working groups, sit at the stand-ups and understand exactly what, when and where they're supposed to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it is actually used early in projects, and also I've had to bring it in when I've taken over projects and a RACI doesn't exist, just for my understanding, so I understand exactly those 5 questions: what people are doing, when they're supposed to be consulted and informed, and where on the project they're supposed to be brought in.
You sort of alluded to a little bit of this as you were going through those 3 points, really. A well-crafted RACI matrix can prevent misunderstandings. And just in a recent webinar that we did about positive sponsorship, we talked about noisy stakeholders and keeping noisy stakeholders at bay. And some of the things that you were talking about in their team dynamics and accountability, I think probably part of the role of the project manager is to keep not just the scope and the deliverables on track, but people on track. So everyone's looking in the same direction. And again, that goes back to that management skill that we've talked about before. But it can get nasty. And you talked about getting onto projects, and it doesn't exist.
Exactly. And so it sets the ground rules. And when we have a RACI that's set up, people then understand exactly when and where they're supposed to, I guess, put input into the project meetings, steering committees, and also working group meetings. And so there's no misunderstandings with anyone as to why they're doing that, why they're speaking up, why they're being consulted, why their input is valuable. Because at the end of the day, a project manager needs to ensure that there's integration between all groups. And this is one way of ensuring that everyone is included, no one is excluded, there is no favoritism, there's no duplication of roles, there is no finger pointing, there is no people saying, I didn't know that this was what I was supposed to be doing, because it's clearly set out when and where someone is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And basically, we can go through each of these, what the RACI stands for, in the next slide.
Okay, definitions.
Definition. So, responsible is usually the person that actually completes the action, completes the artifact, completes the actual job that is meant to be done in a particular project or program. And accountable means that the buck stops with them. They are the person that signs off, and they are the person that ultimately is queried if something is not done, or if it's poorly done, or if it's not done enough or properly. And so they're the ones that will be expected to answer as to whether something is done satisfactorily or not. So
And
they
that's
would
not
actually be
always
the
the project manager, is it? Sometimes
no,
people think it's always, but it's not always the project manager.
it's not always the project manager. So it could be a steering committee member. It could be the sponsor. So it depends on exactly what is that artifact, or it could be like, for example, the budget, or it could be anything.
Yeah.
It really is like who is accountable to that decision or artifact or job that's being done.
Mm.
And consulted means that it's usually a group that's getting impacted by the deliverables, by the project, but they may not necessarily be involved in the project team, although an SME subject matter expert is generally included so that they can provide input into whatever is being done and whether they are happy with the end result. So often I hear, even on the news recently, there are major programs that are happening in countries, and you hear that certain groups have not been consulted, and yet decisions and other things that have been done have been completed without groups that are being impacted knowing about it.
Yeah.
So that is actually not a good way of actually delivering something when a group that's being impacted is not consulted.
It's basic common sense and respect, but that doesn't exist everywhere,
That's right. And
sadly.
the thing is, if you have a RACI, it actually identifies these groups early, and then without having to say that, oh, I forgot about this group, or I wasn't aware about this group, because it's actually in black and white, it's included in the RACI, it's very clear for everyone, and there's no question as to why they've been included or not. It's because they need to be consulted and decisions need to be made based on their input. So informed is, and also just going back to the consulted, so that's a two-way feedback. So the project team is grabbing information from the consultative group and also, I guess, querying about it. So it's a two-way communication. And whereas informed is definitely a one-way communication. So that would be, for example, if a project had redundancies that came out as a result of the completion of projects, which often happens when there's new technology and people get replaced, then informed would be, for example, that there is a communication that goes out to the organisation to say that, you know, a certain number of people have been made redundant from the team, and it's a one-way communication. So it's information that's being informed to everyone so that everyone is aware what's happening in the organisation. It's not a two-way communication.
And I've said this before, Margaret, but as I go through and start picking through these webinars and we start talking about this stuff, it, project management is not easy. It's actually really complex. When you put the people aspect, the management, the technology, the customer, whatever it is, you put all of those things together. It's actually very complex. And just before we move forward on this slide, last year I was doing a RACI for an organisation, and they wanted at one stage two people to be accountable for the same thing. I said no, but I just wondered if you had a comment on that one.
Well, that's right, because I have actually been in organisations where you have a sponsor who is the manager of two project owners,
Yep,
and the two project owners, that means that they're getting a benefit out of the resulting completion of the project. However, there is a conflict between the two project owners. They're the same level, but yet they're different business units, but yet they're both getting a benefit from the project. So sometimes you may have the situation where one project owner believes a decision to go one way and another project owner believes that the decision should go another way because they've each got a vested interest in their
yeah,
own teams. And so you wouldn't have those two project owners as accountable because it's in their own interest to have a decision that's made in a certain direction.
yeah.
So you would have to go higher up and you would need to go to their manager, and it's usually the sponsor, in basically deciding on what the decision should be, and therefore that's the accountable position, because their interest is in the best interest of the organisation or the best interest of their section of the organisation rather
Yeah.
than a particular business unit.
I mean, it's
So
a fascinating model when you give that example. Just these four things. It's a fascinating model because instead of them being accountable and puffing their chest out, they're going to probably be consulted about what's happening, but somebody else is going to be accountable. They might turn out to be responsible at the end of the day, um, but they might also just turn out to be informed. I mean,
that's
it's
right.
so, it is so powerful for just that four things. But
That's
already in a couple of slides, we've given really interesting examples. Thanks, Margaret.
that's okay. So this is a very simplistic, basic format of how RACI would apply and how you would complete one. But basically, you would have the artifacts on the left-hand side and all the basically project or people that are basically stakeholders that are impacted or need to be included in the project or program at the top. In a much more complex RACI, which I have had to do in the past, at the top, I basically color code the individual people in a certain color code. So I might have a color code of the project team, that's one color. I might have a color code for the subject matter experts that relate to, for example, finance in another color. For example, another group might be marketing, in another
Yeah.
colour, IT in another colour, and then external stakeholders in another colour, and the rest of the organisation maybe in another colour. And that way you're able to clearly see and identify at a glance who's responsible, who's accountable, who's informed, and who's consulted.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the left-hand side, I normally have the artifacts that I call them umbrella artifacts. And umbrella artifacts, I basically call those ones for the ones that are always active from the beginning of the project until the end. An example of that would be a project plan. An
Yeah.
example would also be the budget. So the budget is always from the beginning till the end, and it's an umbrella artifact. Same with the
Yeah.
plan. Then you have different artifacts and different deliverables or different items that are needed for the project or the program on the left-hand side, and they would be drafted or completed at different phases. And so those ones I put underneath the umbrella artifacts.
That's an interesting way of describing it, actually, the umbrella artifacts, the ones that continue all the way through. I've not heard it described that way, but it's a really good way of describing it. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, so who uses the RACIs? Just the project manager sitting in a room by themselves?
No. So the project manager would probably draft the RACI and, identify who all of the stakeholders are. And that would come usually from the project charter or from an initiation document. Or it could actually be drafted from the business case, because generally the people that are required for the project are identified in the business case.
Yeah.
And the impacted groups and things like that. And so you would draft a RACI pretty much straight away after that. And that just sets the tone, it sets the baseline for the project. And you would also basically disseminate it to the whole team so that team members are aware and they understand when and where their artifacts need to be done, or when and where they need to be consulted, or when they're informed, so that you don't have this statement saying, I didn't know that this was happening. It was clearly set out from the start,
Yeah.
and they know that they're going to get, status reports or copies of status reports or things like that. So a status report, that would be another artifact that would actually be an umbrella artifact. Stakeholders for clarity on involvement, absolutely, because if they're not identified up front, they're not consulted, then that actually means that the project team has excluded them for some reason, and that's
Yeah.
not a good look on basically the project team or the resultant stakeholders that need to know or need to be informed. And absolutely executives, and sometimes executives are accountable, and again they may believe that the project manager is accountable when in fact
Yes.
they're the ones that are accountable,
Mm.
especially for decisions that are being made.
Yeah, and that happens often in my experience, and
Yeah.
I believe it's up to the project manager to educate and advise what that actually means. I noticed when you were talking about the team members to understand their duties, and it made me think about projects or programs that I've been managing where I've got a number of, say, software development teams. So there's not just one; there's a number on different projects across the streams. It's really important that they all know exactly what they're doing. So where there are dependencies, who takes the lead and who follows. And so often, in my experience, that's not done either, particularly around the agile where people are off doing their agile stuff and, you know, they've not got that interconnectedness. A RACI can be really helpful. And these things don't have to be big and complex your example, they can be simple. It's the process of going through the development of it that's probably the most powerful aspect. Oh, so why
So
use one? Yeah, okay.
yeah, so as we've mentioned, it's to avoid confusion and, finger pointing, or people that believe that they're the ones that should be doing certain tasks or activities when it's actually not them, it's someone else. And so yes, it does provide accountability and transparency. So people understand exactly what they're supposed to be doing, their role, whether they're accountable for something, they're responsible for something, they're supposed to be doing something. And it does improve communication and collaboration, especially because you understand up front who are all the stakeholders that are impacted, and therefore which ones are to be consulted, which ones are to be informed. And yes, I agree, it does speed up decision making, because it helps with understanding that if someone is responsible for drafting a document, or actually writing something, that the person that's accountable understands that they're meant to sign off, so that
Yes.
it's very clear.
Yeah.
And often, and it's one of the top 10 reasons why projects fail, is that the delays in getting stuff signed off or
Yeah.
decisions being made.
I know.
And
It's
that
staggering.
staggering. It could just simply be that if this is set up initially, that is the RACI, that it can expedite decisions, it can expedite accountability, and allow the project to run a lot smoother.
Excuse me. Look, I did a national program around biosecurity, and you can imagine the amount of stakeholders that we had across Australia. There was a lot, and we had to do policy and documentation and things like that. Excuse me. And at a point in time, I found, people were not being accountable, not being responsible for what they needed. So it was like um, a morphing of the RACI just for the documentation to get it moving. Some of this stuff had to go up to federal government committees, so it was, and I basically just said, this is what's going to happen. This is what we've agreed. This is what's going to happen. This is the timetable. If you don't do it, it's out. Like, because we don't have time for this sort of stuff. Um, and I found that people started to come on board. In the past, people were doing reviews, document reviews, and they were, don't like that, don't like that, and it would be 5 or 6 times. I went, no, 2 reviews, that's it, done. Don't like the documents, out, and then we've got to work out what the consequence is. So it's that creative part of project management. What are the tools that you've got? What is there another thing that you need? Is it a different situation? Do I need to morph something? Do I use a tool in a different environment than what I normally think? And also when, and you're going to talk about that too. When do we use this? Do we put it in the drawer at the start of the project?
So it is, like I mentioned before, actually drafted when you set up the project, and it could be during the initiation project charter, or as a result from signing off of the business case, because then the roles and responsibilities are pretty much set in the business case, and it's basically a good tool as a baseline for people to understand, okay, when do they need to be consulted? When do they need to draft documents or do
Yeah,
certain activities or tasks? And so it's a good time to have it done then. And absolutely, if you're delegating tasks and responsibilities, you can refer to the RACI and say, as per the RACI, this is what was agreed. And you can point out that that's the task that was supposed to be
yeah,
done at a certain point. But people should understand that as soon as the RACI is distributed. And as you have said, as written here, and it has happened to me before, when people believe that they are the ones responsible for doing something, or they believe they're not responsible for doing something, and
yeah,
finger point. And so just referring them back to the RACI to say, well, this is what the RACI has stated, and for them to understand, well, Yeah, that's right. There shouldn't be any confusion. It's black and white. It's in the RACI. It's been
Yeah,
distributed. It's been agreed. And
yeah,
so, that's a good point to bring it up as well. And
yeah.
as you said, during project reviews and audits, I think that when you have an audit or a project review, the first thing that a lot of auditors ask is who is the team? What are their roles and responsibilities? And I think that the RACI is a good way of, and also the project org structure, the
Yeah,
RACI is a good way of actually showing what the different responsibilities, accountabilities, consultative and informed stakeholders, basically that are in the RACI.
I know that in my experience, that I've had project managers or even sponsors a bit nervous about a RACI because there's a lot, they see that there's a lot of people involved or a number of areas in the organisation that don't necessarily get on for whatever reason, and they're nervous about them coming to an agreement through this RACI. But like we've talked about, it's not done in isolation. This RACI is done with the people involved to get the agreement and work out any issues that arise if something does happen. So, I mean, I haven't actually found that it's been a difficult process, but I think that's more to do with the communication and the collaboration with people. I'm not sure what it is.
I think also a lot of sponsors may not actually understand what their role is. And
True.
so they see accountable and they probably get scared that they're supposed to be
Yeah.
doing something they know nothing about
Yeah.
or that they have to sign off on. And so I think that would be cleared up if they had a bit of training or basically if you explain to them, what needs to be done when.
Yeah.
But I've noticed that a lot of organisations now are starting to do sponsor training so that
Yes.
these sponsors understand exactly what
Thank
their role
goodness.
is and what they
Yeah.
have to do.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that's in the um, top 10 reasons projects fail, but for me, I have seen it so many times. The sponsor is not helpful to the project at all. So, anyway, there you are. Now, don't forget to subscribe to the channel by clicking down below and give us a thumbs up if you're happy with the content so far. Okay, so this is where we're going to talk about where is the RACI applied in projects? At what sort of stage? And you've talked a lot about doing the RACI at the start, but you and I both know that that doesn't always happen, does it?
No, it doesn't. And especially like I've taken over projects that are midstream.
Yeah,
And just for myself, just to get an understanding of the landscape, who the team, basically who's in the team, and what stakeholders are impacted, you basically need to have a RACI drafted. And it's such a good tool to have just so that you make sure that no one is left out and that everyone is consulted and basically in in terms of projects, a good project manager will always make sure that there's integration. So
yeah,
you need to have and you need to understand who the groups are, who the people are, the stakeholders, so that there is perfect integration happening across the board. Because usually when someone does something in a group, it will impact someone else in another group. So you need to ensure that both groups are aligned.
yeah. Or even when people leave, when executives leave, or somebody's come in on secondment, they need to be refreshed as to what the agreement is. Don't, as a project manager, assume that this person knows every detail about what's happening in your project. Pay them the courtesy of going and saying, well, by the way, this is what you're accountable for, or we're going to consult you, or whatever it is, according to the RACI that we've already had approved. Mm. Okay, so we're within cross-functional teams and matrixed organisations. Talk a little bit more about that, Margaret.
Yeah, so as I just mentioned before, when you have groups, so it might be the finance team or might be the marketing
Yeah,
team, or, and the finance team might want it in a certain way, but the marketing team wants certain things because it's standardized. It could be anything. It could be the
yeah,
font, it could be the brand, it could be the logos, it could be anything. So, sometimes you need to have both groups agree to make sure that it's aligned and it's within policy and both groups are happy.
yeah. Absolutely. And I notice you've got in agile or waterfall environments, so neither one of you are any more special than the other. Um, this RACI goes across the program or the project, and it sends its little feelers out um, across change managers, as you've mentioned, also finance, all of those sorts of areas. Particularly if you're trying to get approvals done um, throughout the course of your project, which you are. You're usually trying to get procurement through or some finance through, resources maybe, whatever it is. If you've set that RACI up early on, even with recruitment, it smooths the way because everybody knows what their position is and what's expected of them. Yeah.
That's right. It's like a baseline. It's a standard from where you can move on from because
Yeah.
like a line in the sand.
Like a line in the sand, exactly. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the examples and probably a bit more in the next slide. But where I've used RACIs before is where I've been called into a project that's in flight, and for whatever reason, there's an issue or a number of issues. Um, One particular one is a critical situation, which is pretty prevalent at the moment because we've got flood conditions. But in crisis management, when there's not a lot of time to do anything, you don't have time to do big user requirements or even write project plans. You've really just got to know who's going to do what when. Um, and so that's something that I've done. When issues of scope or ownership arise mid-project, and you sort of alluded to this as well. And I've had that experience where one part of the organisation where the project is working into is fearful almost of talking to another part of the organisation because of things that have happened in the past or personality issues. But that other area of the business is actually a business stakeholder. So then there comes issues of scope or ownership that arise, and you sort of talked about that too, where people are confused as to whether they're doing this or they're not doing that. Which one. And if it's
Mm.
not clear, as we know, it's very easy for people to go, "Oh, I don't have a bar of that. That's not me. I don't know." So that's another one. But that really means that the project manager has to go out and talk to these people and get the RACI bedded down. Also, where there's large numbers of stakeholders, I sort of alluded to this before about the documentation. What a nightmare that was. Large numbers of stakeholders with disparate agendas. A national program, which was at the time a biosecurity threat. So we didn't have a lot of time. We had to get stuff
Yeah,
done.
yeah.
Now, this is an example of my RACI, and this is just a portion of the RACI that I do, and I always do them so that they fit on one page, one portrait size page, no matter how big the program is. If I can't fit that onto one page, then we're probably not going to work through things because like those examples that I gave you, things are critical quite often. We don't want to have to involve too many people to be decision makers. We've got to get stuff done quick, smart. I colour code things, but I colour code them in the traffic lights. So if you're responsible, accountable, consult, um, inform. And the other one I've got is out of scope. So in my example, some people, for them, that's actually out of scope because remember, this is a large range of stakeholders, often across a national program or something where it's really urgent. a crisis sort of situation. So what happens then is people look at this and they go, oh, I'm the red. And they look up, oh, that's me. I'm in the red. I'm the red. I'm the red. And it's really easy for them to see, oh, I'm accountable for, oh, you're accountable for that. Um, and I found that when I'm going through these to get to the final agreement, that's when people will go, no, I think you're accountable. No, I think, well, we're both accountable. And that's that example I gave before. No, you're not both accountable. Let's work through that again. And it can be a little bit circular, but that's still okay because it's a powerful, powerful thing. I often find that people get most upset by just being informed. They don't like that as
Oh, I
much.
see. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't like that as much. But as you can see in this example, yeah, there was a lot of people informed because there was a very broad stakeholder base. Um, and the other thing that I always do with my RACI is I kill two birds with one stone in that I make it a process. So I will go uh, if I'm looking at the project or I'm looking at whatever it is that we've got to resolve. What's the process we're going to step through? We're going to do this phase, that phase, or whatever it is. Um, and so, as you can see with this one, program planning, that's the first phase. So, who's responsible? And that all links back to my schedule. So, basically, everything for me when I do program management, everything's integrated, everything links back together. So, people can go, oh, yeah, that's right. And that is familiar to them already. And as they go down the page, they can go, oh, now we're on emergency management. What happens in emergency management? This part. Or now we're on, I don't know, business as usual, whatever it is, you know. So it's very clear. But yes, again, one portrait size page. If you can't get it on one portrait size page, then you probably need to do something else, like you might need another program as well, or a parallel program, or halt something, or anyway, as
Well,
project
that's right.
managers, we
Yeah.
got the tools, haven't we? You know?
Mm.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, it's fine. Yeah, I was just going to say you want it to be a bird's eye view or being able to glance it on a page
Yes,
so that
yes,
it's very quick and you're ensuring that you can always refer to it, make sure that
yep,
all the groups are consulted or they're included, and that way you don't miss anyone out.
yeah, that's so important. And if you are lucky enough to have a change manager, to integrate this into the change management plan as well, so that they are aware of this as almost a living document. That these are the people that are really fundamental. They're not just regular stakeholders. They're really fundamental. So we put this slide in to talk a little bit about what artefacts link the RACI, because we did talk about the project manager often doing the RACI, but it's often in the business case, Margaret, the RACI. That's where it can start.
It can start at the business case because you generally have the stakeholders that are going to be included in the project, and usually you have to get approval for those stakeholders
Yeah.
because sometimes you have to hire them as external to the company. They're not actually assigned to the project, and so that's where the approval starts, and therefore that's where the RACI can start as well. It can start from as a result of the business case being signed off.
Yeah, and as we've mentioned, sometimes it doesn't get done. Um, but the project manager is not always involved in the business case at that stage, because sometimes the project manager is assigned after the business case is signed off because of the budget, like you're saying. Now,
Mm.
when I first did this, I had change plan first and then project plan, and then I changed them around because probably more of the way that I do things, where the change manager is working in my program and I sort of guide that governance sort of area. So a lot of that stuff is in my project strategy, where I include the RACI, but it might also be in people's project brief or project plan, I guess, if it's not already in the business case. But fundamentally, it's got to be somewhere. We think,
That's yeah, that's right. If it's not in the business case, it can be a separate document as a result
Yeah,
of the business case being signed off.
yeah,
Because, like you said, generally you need the business case to be signed off before the project manager is appointed, especially if they're going to be hired from externally.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, By this stage too, the governance plan may need a refresh depending on when the business case was done. And I've worked on projects where the business case was done 12 months ago, and now we're just starting the project. Well, everything basically has to be refreshed. And when I'm talking governance plan, I put that in my project strategy, and that includes the org chart for the project, the RACI. I will often have a bit of change management stuff in there, or the stakeholder engagement, how I'm going to do that, and the comms plan. All of that goes
Mm.
into my project strategy. But sometimes that is separate in a change plan. And then also in a deliverables register, and I think I said the last time we talked that people don't talk about a deliverables register anymore, so it's sort of not cool. But um, if you're working through what are the deliverables of your project, say you're a project manager and you're working on the schedule, for example, you've got the scope, you're starting to work on the deliverables, that will sometimes tell you who might be a key stakeholder and who may be responsible and need to be informed. They may not have been mentioned in the RACI because sometimes the scope develops the deliverables more clearly over time in that first phase, for example, in initiation when we're going through the planning, or in an iterative environment, where now we're going to do something else, set up another, I don't know, product or whatever it is. So a deliverables register or whatever that is, whatever you want to call that, that can also be a source of information that links the RACI. The change plan, I think we would extract information maybe out of the change readiness assessment. The change plan, stakeholder assessment, certainly, and a comms plan. I couldn't think of anything else, Margaret. Could you think of anything else?
Uh, Potentially the training plan, if there's usually in the change group,
Yeah,
there may need to be, especially I know that, for example, where we're implementing a brand new system and it's replacing manual activities. For example, people are doing their work on Excel, but there's going to be now a new system where the work's going to be in the new system. Generally, you may need a training plan to be able to basically include what people are going to need training, and then also that also forms part of the RACI, because
yeah,
they need
yes,
to be consulted and informed in terms of arranging workshops for training, or
true.
it may be a webinar that's set up and then it's delivered to people and they can do their own training in their own time.
Yeah.
But it's another way of basically ensuring that the RACI includes the people that are going to be trained.
And I guess there's a lot of other things too, like there's the test plan as well. So, as we're sort of talking about this, the artifacts that link to the RACI are numerous, actually. Um,
That's right.
so it's a matter of thinking through all of these things, I think. But that's an interesting slant on it. I might update the slides before we get them on the website, but thank you for that, Margaret.
That's
Okay.
okay.
So again, don't forget to subscribe down below. Thank you if people that have joined us to watch this video. If you have any questions or any ideas about what you'd like to see covered on the project management clinic, contact me or contact Margaret, and I've got Margaret's details below here, so you can have a look. You can contact Margaret by email. You can contact me by email, also at the website, or at the YouTube channel. So all of that information is there, and it will be put, the PowerPoint will be put on the website, www.pmclinic.com.au, and the YouTube will be there for everyone to have a look at. Again, thank you so much, Margaret. Another fascinating talk about RACI, and I'm sure most people wouldn't recognise just how diverse it actually is to use and apply.
And how valuable it is.
How
It is
valuable.
so valuable.
So valuable. Remember, we talked about this with issues management, I think, as well, in one
Yeah,
session, and people sort of, don't consider it because it's a bit uncool. But these are really powerful tools if you know how to use them, and
that's
so
right.
often people don't, do they?
Mm.
Anyway, again, it's been fantastic. And I just want to let people know that on the 5th of June, we're going to be talking about the solo project manager. So that's project manager Q&A, 5th of June, 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And we have a question from someone asking, are they really a project manager? Because they don't have a team. So that'll be interesting to go through as well. So thanks again, Margaret.
Thank you, Suzanne.
And for everyone else, have a wonderful project day.